לפני שנצלול למיטאפ של היום ולמייק, על ההקדמה שלו, Diffusion מודל, מודלים שאף אחד פה לא שמע עליהם ולא מעניינים אף אחד. אז אנחנו ניתן לשחר להגיד כמה מילים עצים ונזרום מזה.
תודה בלה. טוב, דבר ראשון שוב תודה לבלה ולין הספקטור על שיתוף פעולה שני שלנו כבר, ואני מקווה שיהיו עוד כמה פה. בלה מארגן גם מיטאפים של מדיקל, וכדאי לעקוב. טוב, אנחנו יהיו לנו היום את ההרצאות של מייק ושל בהג'אט, מעמידים עצים, חברה גלובלית, עולמית, ו4,000 עובדים בעולם, כמה מאות משרדים, עובדים במעל 100 מדינות בעולם, באמת מעבירים סחורות כמעט מכל נקודה לנקודה בעולם. נדלק כל הסרטון הזה. עושים הרבה Machine Learning פה בחברה, יש לנו צוות Data Science פנימי, וגם יש לנו שותפות עם חברת ESG, חברת פרויקטים. בתוך החברה אנחנו מתעסקים בפרויקטים עם דאטה טבולרי, NLP, Time Series, אפילו Computer Vision, בעיקר על פרויקטים, על מוצרים פנימיים של החברה, אם זה אנליזה של Sales Report, Employee Report, Anomaly Detection, התכתבויות עם הלקוחות שלנו, ועד חיזוי דקים ותמחור דינמי ודברים כאלה. זהו, אז יש לנו את השיתוף פעולה עם DSG, שבאמת שותפים אסטרטגיים שלנו, שאנחנו עושים הרבה פרויקטים משותפים ביחד, וגם מפתחים יכולות כמו Evolve, שזה בעצם פלטפורמה שעוזרת לעשות את המוניטורינג והמודלים. זהו, אנחנו מגייסים, אז אתם מוזמנים. נדבר על זה. אני קצת פחות מגייסים, אבל כן מגייסים להרבה משרות אחרות, אז אנחנו מוזמנים ליצור קשר איתי או עם אלכס או עם שיר. זהו, תודה רבה. מייק?
והיום אנחנו נדבר על Denoising Diffusion Probabilistic Models, או DBPM בקצרה, או סתם Diffusion Models, ואנחנו נדבר על זה בחתך ספציפי של איך אנחנו משתמשים ב-Diffusion Models, אלו לגנרות של דוד. אוקיי. Okay, no problem. No problem. Okay, now it's an outline of my lecture. We'll talk about the state of generative AI before and after May 2021. Then I'll talk about what are DBPMs, what are diffusion models. Then we'll talk about some math which behind the diffusion models. It doesn't look so simple, but I'll try to explain it simply. Then we'll talk about some shortcomings of diffusion models and ways we can overcome them. And then, if time allows, I will talk about some buzzwords and some neat tricks that most of the DBPM papers are using. Okay. A couple of words about me. I'm a principal data scientist in South Security. What we are doing, we are trying to identify attacks on APIs, and we are trying to tackle it with some machine learning. I'm also founder of deep night learners, which are deep learning papers. We are reviewing deep learning papers in Hebrew. And I'm also co-author of machine and deep learning book in Hebrew. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, I'll start from talking about the generative AI state before 21 May 2021. And what we got? We got some GANs, some very cute GANs, style GANs, cycle GANs, disco GANs, all these GANs, and they have a bunch of variational autoencoders, hierarchical VIE, VQVIE, which is still very popular, and we all know these generative models. And these generative models, also GANs and VIEs as well, or capable of synthesizing some high-quality face images, for example. And there are some late model which is called DAL-E, which is a combination of variation autoencoders and GANs. And this model was capable of drawing such armchairs and having the shape of an avocado. It's cute. These models, DAL-E was also capable of drawing some pentagonal picture frame with quite good quality. But something happened in May 2021. It happened a very interesting thing. So after beforehand, we have face images and we have some frames of different colors with very good quality. But then something happened, and now we see, for example, we see our models are capable of drawing of, for example, dolphin and astronaut suit on Saturn in the R station style. And for example, we have DAL-E 2, which are capable to draw a panda mad scientist mixing sparkling chemicals. And the quality of these images are astonishing. These models are also capable of drawing, of synthesizing, generating these images in a very high resolution. Now they become further. We have imaging from the Google research. We're also capable of drawing excellent quality pictures from longer text. For example, here we have an art gallery displaying Monet paintings. The art gallery is flooded. Robots are going around the art gallery using pedal boards. You can see that the picture just depicts going according to this description, and its quality is just very high. We have many examples. For example, majestic oil painting of Raccoon Queen wearing, many examples. And they have, and then they have stable diffusion. And what was unique with stable diffusion, that was capable to synthesize this picture very fast. The models like DAL-E 2, it took about 10 seconds, 20 seconds. To draw a single image, and stable diffusion was capable of doing it in a couple of seconds. And then you have some really crazy stuff, and all these pictures were drawn by generative models of different generative models. But it is not all. They have text to video. They have models which were capable of synthesizing videos from text. Make a video and some from imaging research, and they have Funaki video. Then they have also text to audio. They have several models which were synthesizing music, audio, and sound from the text description. They also have I don't have internet connection. They have also text to human motion. So they have models which can synthesize a human motion from text description. For example, you can write a text in style the man is running through the hills, and the model is capable of just synthesizing a video which depicts which goes along this description. So now the question is, what happens? What happened on May 2021? What happened is denoising diffusion probabilistic models, or DDPM. And what happened is this paper, diffusion models beat GANs on image synthesis. And for the best of my knowledge, it was the first paper which claimed that the diffusion models are capable of synthesizing images of better quality than GANs. Okay, I reviewed this paper in Deep Night Learners in Hebrew, so you are invited to read it. Okay, so now we'll talk about modern generative models. So what are diffusion? What are the DPMs about? Okay, every generative models we know, it just takes some simple distribution. It can be Gaussian, it can be uniform distribution or some interval, and then this model is capable of synthesizing a new, much more complex distribution from this simple distribution. For example, we can take a high-dimensional Gaussian distribution and to build from it a picture. The Gaussian distribution is a very simple distribution. We can easily sample from this distribution, and our image data is much more complicated, so it can be easily generated. So the generative model of most types, for example, GANs and variational autoencoders and the DPMs and the normalized flows, all these models will feed into it some simple distributions, like Gaussian. In most cases, it is Gaussian, and then this model just synthesizes for us a much complex distribution. For example, images, human motion, videos, music, whatnot. So let's talk a bit about DDPM. So like variational autoencoders and GANs and normalized flows, DDPM just generates data from noise. Complicated, it just generates, as I already mentioned, it just generates complicated distribution from a simple distribution like noise. This one. Okay, so now what is the main principle of diffusion process? The main principle of diffusion process is very simple. For example, we have a data, we have our data set, and we want to train the diffusion model on this data set. So how it can be done? So it can be done in two steps. First, we just destroy the data by adding some small portion of Gaussian noise. It doesn't have to be Gaussian noise. There are some more recent works which are adding non-Gaussian noise, but in most cases it is Gaussian noise. And then they just train our model to recover the data by reversing the process model. So they are destroying our data by gradually adding a small portion of noise, and then we just train our model to reverse it. Okay, no, it is not just it is not as GANs. In GANs it is done in one step. In the variational autoencoder it's done in one step. Or here we synthesize our data in multiple steps. In multiple steps. So this process is iterative. Okay, it just looks like this. We have some forward diffusion process. The forward diffusion process is just adding of a small portion of noise to the data, and then we train our model to reverse this process. Okay, so but what happens next? What happens next? It is very simple. If we just learn to reverse this process, so for iteration t, we just train our model to reconstruct our iteration time t-1, then we just can feed random noise to diffusion model and generate new pieces of data. We just do it iteratively. Compared to GANs, to diffusion, to generative models, it is done in an iterative fashion here. Okay, some quick pictures of this. So now, then you look at on most of the papers about diffusion models, the math behind it looks very complicated. And sometimes it is really complicated. Diffusion models have interconnection with this so-called score-based model and some stochastic differential equations. But in order to understand what diffusion model is, we don't need to know all this math. Actually, the main principle behind diffusion models are quite simple. And the objective of this lecture is to try to explain you the basic mathematical principles behind the most basic version of diffusion model. Okay? So what is diffusion model? It is a Markov chain of t steps. So what is Markov chain of t steps? I already told you that we are destroying our data iteratively by adding a small amount of noise. So at each iteration, we are adding some noise to the content of the previous iteration. Okay? This is the forward process. What forward process does for images, it just turn pixels, each pixel into independent Gaussians. Okay, we have our image. The pixel in this image are usually very related one to each other, and then they are just adding noise, which destroys all these connections between this pixel and turns all these pixels into Gaussian noise. Okay, this is how it looks like. So we have here our initial data x0, and then we are adding small portions of noise, and then the distribution of the iteration t given iteration t minus 1 is denoted by q. So we just and it is very important that this distribution it does not depend on xt minus 2, xt minus 3, and in this sense this process is Markovian process. Okay, and very simple expression. The conditional distribution of xt given xt minus 1, it is just Gaussian distribution. Then the expectation is a square root of 1 minus beta t xt minus 1, and it has some covariance metric. So you see that the forward process is Markovian. So we just take the content of iteration t minus 1 and just adding some amount of Gaussian noise. It is very simple. Okay. So the distribution of xt given xt minus 1 is just a normal Gaussian distribution. It has expectation of mu t and the variance of sigma t. Okay. Here you see you're just adding a small portion of noise to your data x0. And here is mu t. It is just expression for mu t. You can see they are just destroying. We are just adding an amount of noise which depends on the content of the previous iteration. So we're just adding small amount of noise, and it turns our data after big T iteration into independent Gaussian noise. Okay. So, and beta T are parameters. We'll talk about it later. And how we train this diffusion model? Now we're just trying to learn our reversing process by predicting the conditional distribution of xt minus 1, the content of the iteration t minus 1 given xt. So doing machine learning, generative AI is based on machine learning. So we just model this reverse process. We just model this distribution by some model, and we just try to train model which mimics this distribution. And this is how it happens. We have a forward process, which we have a forward process which just adds noise to the picture. Then the picture turns to be a pure Gaussian noise, and then we're just training a model to mimic conditional distribution of the previous iteration. And this way we can start from the pure noise by doing big T reconstruction step, and we have a new piece of data. It is a very important observation which I want to share with you. Reverse process distribution of the iteration t minus 1 given xt is not Gaussian. It's very important to understand it. Because this distribution it depends on your data distribution. For example, this distribution is very different for different data set. So if you take data set of dog and cat images and the different data set of some images of cars, this distribution gonna be very different. But this distribution, if you condition by x0, this distribution is Gaussian. It is very easy to prove, very easy It takes about half of page, but it is very easy. It just uses properties of Gaussian distribution. But it is very important. This distribution is not Gaussian, and this distribution is Gaussian. We'll try now. I will explain you how we model this distribution. But it is very important to understand that this distribution is not Gaussian. Okay, so now I ask you, how can we optimize P of xt minus 1 conditioned by xt? Okay, so we can. So as I already mentioned, we can do it our well-known machine learning tool. We're just doing log likelihood optimization. Everybody of you knows what is log likelihood optimization. We're just maximizing the log probability of our data set. It's very simple. Just usual stuff. Okay? So, what we know, I already mentioned it, that the forward process is Markovian. So if I condition the distribution of xt given xt minus 1 by xt minus k, it changes nothing. And then how do we approach this problem? We approach this problem with very well-known tools from generative modeling. I think everybody here knows what is variational autoencoder, and it is very simple. It is very similar to find an objective of variational autoencoder. Just here we have many variational autoencoders within one diffusion model. I'll show you now. So they are trying to optimize this distribution. And what is this distribution? It is a distribution of the content of all t iterations given our data. Okay? And the next formula is also very simple. We are just leveraging the fact that our forward process is Markovian. Yeah. Question? And as we already assumed, we assumed that the forward process is fully Gaussian, and here is the expression. And this expression, we just use Jensen inequality to get it. And this is, I forgot to say, this is our likelihood or data. We're just trying to maximize the log probability of our data set. Okay, so let us start from this formula. So now we are trying to optimize this formula so that we are trying to find a set of parameters theta of our deep learning model, which maximizes this log probability of our dataset or log likelihood. Okay. So since 2020, most of the DPMs, based on the idea proposed in this paper. This is not so popular paper, but it contains a set of very important ideas which are been leveraging all the time even in quite recent papers. So how it is done actually? So we're just taking our objective, which you have seen 2 slides ago, and we just represent it as a sum of t summons. Okay, the first summon is just a reconstruction term. It is very similar to variational autoencoder. What is this term about? We are just trying to maximize the condition probability of x0 of our piece of data given the content of the first iteration. Okay, so you want to try to reconstruct your data in the best way. So you just here is the reconstruction term. It is very similar to variational autoencoders. Now here, these are more important terms, the most important terms in this expression. And what is actually written here? What is actually written here? Just we are trying to minimize DKL is Kullback-Leibler divergence. So this KL divergence measures distance between probability measures. So here,
it's not a distance. It's not a distance. But,
it's not a distance because it is not symmetric. Yeah, but it is kind of distance. It is not distance. Yeah, you're right. So it is a Kullback-Leibler divergence. So we are trying to minimize the divergence between this distribution. It is this one is a reverse distribution, a real reverse distribution of our data. We are trying to reconstruct xt minus 1 on our real data given xt and x0, and we want to model it by this distribution. Okay, so we are trying to reconstruct our data in the best possible way, and there is one more term. It doesn't contain any parameter, so we neglect it. We don't use it, and all the theory behind the diffusion process are about optimizing this expression. Why this expression? Because it is just one term. Here you have t minus 1 term, and next we will see how can we optimize this distribution. But you need to understand that this distribution is just what stands behind these distributions. What stands behind this expression? This expression is just measures the similarity of our model to the real distribution. This is the real distribution. This is our model, and it is quite similar to what we have in variation autoencoders. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look on LT minus 1. Okay, so first let's take a look in our distribution of distribution we have in xt minus 1 given xt and x0. As I already mentioned, this distribution is indeed Gaussian, and we can compute it easily, and here is the expression. It can seem quite complicated. Nothing complicated here, just games with the base formula and the total probability formula. Nothing complicated here. This is the distribution we have, and this distribution fully follows from our is fully determined by our forward process.
Mike?
Yeah.
Can you give an intuition why this one is normal distribution?
I think I can't give any intuition because it's just, if you I give you an example. For example, you have your image, and you're adding Gaussian noise. Okay, you're adding Gaussian noise in many steps. But if you know your initial image, and if you know the content of t iteration, you're just adding Gaussian noise. So you know from here you started, and you know the content of the iteration number t. So it is quite natural to assume that the iteration t minus 1, you don't know what is exactly the content, but the distribution. So here is just it is a distribution. I don't know what was the value of the iteration t minus 1, but the distribution of it is Gaussian, as I know my initial point, and as I know what I'm starting from. Okay. So let's take a look. So this is very standard expression for KL divergence, which is not distance, as already said. And I would like to show this one. Here we have, just want to come back to this slide. Here we have a KL divergence. Now we just want to write it down, the expression of KL divergence. KL divergence is some integral. So now, if the KL divergence is given by, if you want to compute KL divergence between two Gaussian distribution, we have known expression can be computed easily. Okay, so let's see. Let's take a look at this expression. Oh, it's slow. It's clicker. Okay.
The reason that you don't take the symmetric part of the KL is that because you're interested in one side.
Yeah. And now I told you that we're computing KL divergence between two normal distributions. But you can just correct me, but this one is not a normal distribution. And in reality it is not normal distribution. But we love normal distributions, we love Gaussian distribution, it has very nice properties. So we just want to approximate our non-Gaussian distribution by Gaussian distribution. So we train a model to approximate the parameters of Gaussian distribution. And Summarizing, we're approximating non-Gaussian distribution in terms of the expectation and variance of Gaussian distribution. Why? Because it is very convenient in a mathematical point of view. And this is the expression, okay? Here the expectation, you saw it in the previous slide, and this is our expectation of the output of our model. The output of our model is just the expectation of the content of the iteration t minus 1. Okay? So this expectation is computed under the ground truth distribution xt given x0. What does it mean? So I already explained that we have a forward process which we are adding a small amount of noise to our data. So this distribution is just distribution over our xt. So then they are optimizing our models. We just take our data and averaging all and averaging our objective function over all the given data. And here we are doing very similar stuff. And how do we do it? It's just Monte Carlo. We're just averaging over our whole data. So we have this expression. This is known. This is what we optimize it for, and we're just averaging it over all our data. Okay, but now comes the trick. Okay, the earlier papers before this seminal paper, which managed to beat GANs on the generated image quality, most of the papers which come beforehand are just trying to optimize this expression. And then come this paper, I think several months before this seminal paper, which just proposed to do something different. And what is something different? It's just reparameterization. Now I'm going to show you that with simple reparameterization, we are trying to solve very similar problem, but we are just looking into it from a different angle. Okay? So, and this reparameterization just brought diffusion models to be better than the GANs and variation autoencoders. There are several more optimization, but this one was for me it's the most crucial. Maybe I missed something. Okay. So, in order to understand what is this reparameterization about, we need to recall that xt is just x0, our initial data, with some gradual added Gaussian noise. This is an essence of our forward process. Okay, here they are just adding noise, and they get the content of the iteration t. And this distribution can be computed. You know, it's just some math. So they are adding many portions of Gaussian noise, and you know the Gaussian distribution has a very good property. When you add two Gaussian variables, you get another Gaussian variables, which expectation and the variance can be easily computed. And this is the expression. Okay. So and why do we need this expression? Okay. So we have expression from x0 through xt, and now we can use this expression in order to transform our expression from ut, which is an expectation of xt minus 1 given xt and x0 in this way. Okay, and here epsilon is a standard Gaussian noise. And why is it good, you ask?
Right.
So first of all, you can see that x0 is not there, and so, and now we are not going to 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay. Okay. So and now we are not going to train our model to approximate the content of iteration t minus 1. We are going to train our model to approximate the added noise. And why is it good actually? Why? What is the intuition? Why did it bring us these great results? And the reason is our neural nets are just good in approximated standard Gaussian. We like it. Standard Gaussians are very good. They have very good properties. They are near zero, they are asymmetric. So we are just good in it. So, and now the final steps. We have this expression. Okay, this is just the expression we have in the previous slide. And now this is the final DDPM objective. So we are just LT minus 1. It is written as some coefficient. This is not so important. And here it is just our real noise. And here it is just our noise which we are approximating with our neural net. Okay, and this is our objective. So we took this objective, the variational objective from the previous slide, and then we transformed it in this form, and now we have a sum of these terms. Okay, this is xt, but now it's going to get simpler. This seminal paper of 2021, we don't want to use it. It looks ugly, so let's just drop it, and they really dropped it. And now this is the final objective. Okay, so here it is a final objective. This way, the most basic diffusion models of middle 2021 works. We're just training our neural net to approximate our added noise. Okay, now I want to elaborate a bit about, here we have an expectation of x0 over t and over epsilon. And what all this averaging is? This averaging is, first of all, the averaging of our data samples, of our noise data samples. Then the average over iteration t, and the averaging over random noise samples. So we're adding noise, and we are trying to estimate a noise which was added at each iteration t. Okay, so and this is a very simple algorithm. And this way we just train our DDPM. We have our data. We are just using normal distribution to get our iteration t. Then we sample Gaussian noise. Then we create in one step. We are not going to do many steps, because now we know how to create xt straightforward from x0. We don't need to create x1, x2, x3. We can do it in one step. And then we are just doing gradient descent step on this expression.
And you necessarily converge what you want to converge?
Not always, but GANs, but it is.
GANs you don't converge necessarily.
It doesn't always converge, and you need to work out this coefficient in order to cause convergence, and that's why it is very important how to choose these coefficients. This coefficient beta t. And I will talk about 5 minutes, so I will talk about it. And this is a generating process. So we are just generating noise. Then we generate generate z. Let's drop it. Then we generate a portion of noise for the iteration t. Then we generate. Let's look at 6. Then we generate the content of our iteration t-1. In this way, it just follows from the formulas from the previous slides, and then you generate this content from this expectation. Here you have sigma t. So I answered to Uri that not always converges. So there are two. There are two parameters which are crucial for convergence and the interconnection between them, which is sigma t, so which is a variance with which you generate your data, and the alpha t, which controls the variance of the forward process. Just once. Okay. So, as I already told, if you just try to build your own diffusion process without learning how to build beta T's and sigma T's, it won't converge. So it is very important to understand. We have two sequences of parameters, sigma T and beta T. And beta T, it is very important, it controls variance of the forward process, and the sigma T controls the variance of the reverse process. And all this, and the convergence of the diffusion model of this process, and also the quality of the picture you generate with this process depends on many factors, but among them, this one very important. So I don't have too much time, so I want to show you. There are much research now how to choose these parameters. Okay, but I want to skip this. I want to show you. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you. I have I have a couple of more slides, but I don't have time. And I want to just show you how we can look at diffusion the diffusion models from a different angle. Notice this angle. 10 years ago, I think I have been working for several years in signal processing. So the different angle is the Fourier transform. I liked it, and so let us see the diffusion model through a prism of Fourier transform. Okay, so now we have this very cute image, and here we have a Fourier spectrum of this image. Why we have mostly low frequencies? Anybody has an answer?
Low frequency because the high frequency is noise.
Because it is much simpler. It is much simpler and less mathy. So we have very strong local dependencies in our image. So this pixel is very dependent on this pixel, but it's not so dependent on this pixel. So we have edges, but we don't have too much edges. So we have mostly low frequencies. When we put our image through Fourier transform, we get mostly low frequencies. Okay. Now, so let us see if we do Fourier transform for Gaussian, we get the Gaussian. Okay. Now let's see what it has done with the diffusion process. Here we have our generative process. Here it is the content of the iteration t, and now because the Fourier transform is additive, we have this representation. And now let us see what happens in the beginning and in the end of this diffusion process in the terms of Fourier spectrum. In the beginning, this alpha t bar is very close to 1. So we have a very low frequencies, a very small representation of spectrum here. And now then we add it to the representation of pictures. What we are doing, we are just destroying an edges. So the content of the image is preserved, but what we are doing, we just manage to destroy some fine, delicate details. But we can easily understand what was the content of this picture. And then you are going and then you continue your forward process. You're adding more and more noise, and then you just wipe it off all your pictures. So all your details, all your content. So you start from destroying high frequencies, and then you are destroying the low frequencies. So you're destroying the content. And last slide. So if you look at the diffusion models from through the spectrum through the prism of Fourier transform, so what we just see, what did we see? We see that the early forward process iteration, they destroy fine image details, but the content is preserved. And then we continue our forward process, we're adding more and more edges, and then we destroy an image totally. In the reverse process, we start the first iteration of our reverse process. We start from reconstructing the coarse details, the content of the image, and then on the later iterations, we just reconstruct fine details of the image. So in other words, we're just deblurring the image. We're just deblurring the image. So I think this this view is very interesting. I think I saw it in some lecture, but it doesn't appear in many places. And I have many more slides, but I stop here. If you have some questions, please ask.
I think you can continue for another 5 minutes because.
So I can continue.
Yeah, you can
continue.
continue
Okay,
another 5
okay,
minutes.
okay.
Because it should be 7:30.
Okay.
The lecture is until 7:30.
So-
Can I have
so
can
it's
I have a
important.
question? If we have 5 more minutes. Do you think they went, when they got this good solution, do you think they went from the theory, or do you think they saw that a few years before there were some interesting papers with super resolution that they actually predicted the residuals and just said, let's try this?
I think it is more in the style of let's try it, but you know, do you know what is progressive GAN?
Yeah.
Progressive GAN is a predecessor of style GAN, which is and what is the main idea of ProGAN? The main idea of ProGAN is to start generating of image of size 8 on 8, and then you are just progressively increase you train your network to progressively learn your image. So here they took very similar approach. But by the way, the first paper about diffusion process was written. I don't remember who was the author, but it was written in 2015. 2015. Yeah, Yasha Soldik. Very famous person, and I think somehow they took some inspiration from this paper of progressive GAN because you know how kids learn drawing. They start from drawing some basic stuff, some edges, and then they learn to add some delicate details. And the diffusion process is working very similar. So you are just destroying an image, and then you are trying to reconstruct it from the content to the fine details. You know, experienced artists don't draw this way, but this is a way of learning.
You have videos in the Photoshop that they actually start with blurs and they add the fine details little by little.
Okay.
Layering.
Okay. So I want just to tell a couple of words about several flaws of diffusion models and how we can overcome it. So you can guess the synthesizing of imaging with the diffusion models is time consuming and expensive. Why is time consuming and expensive? Because we are not synthesizing these images in one iteration. So we are doing it iteratively, and I think this paper of 2021 it had 4,000 iterations. Now imagine you need to do 4,000 iterations to synthesize a single image. So this is very slow and expensive. But there are some ways. So there are many papers how we can reduce the reverse iterations. Okay, there are, for example, these papers try to predict step t minus, for example, step t minus 4 from t, or step t minus 10 from t. And there is one quite famous paper. They just try to destroy the Markovian assumption of the forward process. Okay, we can destroy a Markovian assumption of the forward process, so we can do some forward process which is not Markovian. We can add noise which is dependent not just on xt minus 1 but only on x0, and somehow it enabled to reduce this iteration by a factor of 10, I think. And the second way, and which is what is stable diffusion about, so all this stuff, all this reverse process and forward process, it was done in an image space. So yeah, it was some unsambling, upsampling. So they just First, they just train a model to synthesize an image of size 64 on 64, and then they do 2 upsamples to the size 256 to 256, and then they upsample it by a factor of 4. But still, they are doing it in the pixel space, and it is expensive. And then the question is, why don't we do it in the latent space? So we can embed our image into some latent space and do all these steps in the latent space. It is much faster because we can make our latent state quite small. And the stable diffusion, which is very favorable, very famous buzzword. I think before ChatGPT it was the famous word in the generative AI. But stable diffusion, we just don't need. It did 1 and it did 2, and it has some neat tricks as the classifier guidance and the unit representation. I don't have time to talk about. So if you want to learn about it, you can ask me. And now I need to stop. Thank you.
Mike, I have a question.
Okay.
How now that you want to generate a new example,
Okay.
how do you condition on what you want to generate?
So you are talking about conditional generation. So you want to condition your image on some text. So for this purpose, you have language model. So you embed your text with some language model, and then one of the inputs to your diffusion model, which you train, is this embedding. So you have some very big language model. You embed your text, and it is one of the inputs. Now your inputs were noise and iteration, and now you have an additional input, which is embedding of your text. And all this, I have some slides about it. I want to show you. It's all this famous word here. Just like that. An old painting of a corgi wearing a corgi is very. It's a very popular dog type. Anyone who wants to draw images with corgi, I don't know why. So you have a text encoder, okay, and then you just embed your text in some vector. Then you take this embedding, and they use a clip, which is very popular model for text embeddings, for image embeddings simultaneously. And then you just put this embedding into another model, which turns this embedding into an image embedding you want to generate, and then you are doing all your diffusion magic, but conditioned on this image embedding. Okay, and there are additional models which don't have this middle step. They are just trained, for example, imagine don't have this model. It has a frozen text encoder, and from a frozen text encoder, they are just generating an images. They are doing it in 2 upsampling step, but they don't have a model which purpose is to train an image embedding from text embedding. So it is not a mandatory step. But and one more difference, they use frozen text encoder, and DAL E2, they train it. So there are many neat tricks how can you do it, but the essence is very similar, and very similar. You can also generate an audio, music, a video. The approaches are very similar. You embed your text, and then you train your conditional diffusion model. So you just try to build a model which estimates, which tries to predict the noise you added, but given your embedding, number of iteration, and the content of the iteration number t. Yeah, Andreas?
Yeah. How you're saying training? How much time do you train? How much computing power you throw at training? Give us some examples. It doesn't have to be exact, but.
Actually, I don't remember. I know that it is quite expensive. I don't think you can train it on your laptop, even if you have a very powerful laptop. I don't think you can do it. Although there is some model I saw a week or 2 weeks ago, they claim that you can fine-tune your diffusion model on your laptop, but fully training of diffusion models, I think it is. I don't want to tell you to just imaginable number. I don't know. I don't remember. But it's very expensive.
But how?
I can give you an example if you want. I worked for a little while in Google, so we trained this Imagine model.
Okay.
Trained a variant of this Imagine model. It only took 2 days, but we used 128 GPUs.
GPUs or TPUs?
TPUs.
Ah, okay. So it is very expensive.
Yeah.
You don't have TPU on your laptop.
And the data you feed it has to have all sorts of dogs and all sorts of like hats and whatever.
I think you just train it in on the data set, which is very similar to Clip, right? Which you scraped from the internet pictures with tags or captions, and this is the same or very similar data set as you used in Clip embeddings.
So you have the image and the text associated with it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike.
Everyone, thank you, Mike, for the great introduction to the diffusion models. So my name is Bahjat. I'm a PhD student at the Technion, and I'll be presenting a paper of mine called the Denoising Diffusion Restoration Models. So we've seen the great diffusion model as a generative model for image generation. And now we're going to see in this paper how we took this generative model and used it for different tasks. So, as I said, I'm a PhD student at Technion. I've been in the Technion for a long time. And I'm working with my advisor, Professor Miki Elad. I'm one of these people who are like of the new era where my entire PhD is around diffusion models. We research theory and applications. And I was recently at Google Research where, surprise, surprise, I also work with diffusion models. And about my collaborators on this work, so Miki is my advisor. He's an expert in image parsing, and more specifically image denoising, which was like our in to these denoising diffusion models. And we work with a professor from Stanford called Stefano Ermon, who was at the core of this diffusion revolution that happened in the last few years. He authored a lot of papers on diffusion, but the one I'm interested most in is a paper from 2019, which is actually a predecessor to all what we've seen in Mike's lecture a few months ago. I also worked more closely with his student, or who was a postdoc at the time, on this paper, Erlihson, who's currently working at NVIDIA, also with the diffusion team there. And he authored a paper called DDIM, Denoising Diffusion Implicit Models, which accelerated the diffusion process from 1,000 steps to around 20. So that's one of the papers Mike mentioned.
Non-Markovian noise.
Yeah, the non-Markovian model. So this is just to see the impact of these papers. This is the first basically paper in 2019 which sparked this revolution by Ermon. And this is the paper that accelerated it with the non-Markovian geometry paper. All right. So what is this task that we're interested in? We're interested in a task that has been studied for tens of years, for decades now. It's linear inverse problems, or image restoration, where we observe, in this case a vector, but it's an image y, which is our observation. It's our observation of an ideal image. We assume there is an ideal image x that generated this y. It underwent some sort of degradation operator h, which we assume to be linear, and it has some Gaussian noise as well. So when only observing y, we would like to recover the x, the actual ideal image that resulted in this y. So while this is a very mathy setting, it has a lot of very real-world applications. So, for example, super resolution, where we observe a low resolution image, possibly also with some noise. We would like to enlarge it. In painting, where maybe we have a bad connection and some of the pixels arrive, some don't, and we would like to fill in the blanks. Another application is deblurring, where we observe a blurry image. Maybe somebody moved their hand while taking a picture. So that's also fits into this definition of inverse problem. and we would like to restore these images. So just a couple of words of how the deep learning community previously approached these problems. So one way was, well, anybody who took machine learning 101 course was to tell you, okay, so you have your degraded images, you have your clean images, just take a data set and throw it in a neural network, right? Give it to a neural network and ask it to, given Y, predict X, right? You can always take a clean image from some sort of data set, get a low-res version, and ask the model to predict the high-res, and hopefully the model will learn this. But anybody who does this would be right. You can do this, it works, and with certain architectures it can even perform very well. But the problem is that, okay, so you train a model for super resolution, it's not going to be able to do deep learning or any other problem. It's not going to be able to do in-painting. And in case the noise is very heavy or the problem is very underdefined, we could suffer from a problem where we have a regression to the mean, where our end result would not look like a good image. Another approach, which is the non-supervised training, the unsupervised approach, or maybe some of you may know it as a plug-and-play approach. We say, okay, we have a neural network, we have a model that knows something about the data distribution, about the prior distribution, and we have our own knowledge of the degradation operator at inference time. You know, using it, we can approximate the likelihood of the current sample X given our input Y. So using these two elements in the base rule, we can recover the posterior distribution, which is the distribution of ideal images given our observation Y. So some approaches sample from this distribution, some approaches give us the peak of it, the maximum a posteriori. What we're going to do is that we're going to sample from this distribution using diffusion models. And this approach, what's good about it is that it generalizes well for any task. It can handle any inverse problem, whether it's deep learning or super resolution or painting or any other task that fits this linear inverse problem definition. It might be slower, because we probably need to do some iterative scheme, and it might perform worse than a model that was specifically trained for a specific problem that we're interested in. All right, so, okay, I'm gonna run through this because I guess you're all experts in diffusion models now. But yeah, so diffusion models beat GANs on image synthesis, the great paper from 2021. Diffusion models are really good at generating images. Okay, what are these diffusion models? So we've seen that we have basically two distributions that we define. One is the assumed model, the Q, which is real, it has no learned parts. It's just a gradual addition of noise over a pristine image. And there's what was called the backward model, or the generative model, which is parameterized by neural network. We do learn something in that distribution. And it's actually the gradual denoising process that we use to generate the images. We have the Markovian assumption, okay. We want to learn, so we do a likelihood objective, as we just saw in Max lecture. We take the evidence lower bound over the negative log likelihood, gets to a KL divergence between two Gaussians, one that is assumed, one that we just model to be Gaussian. And KL divergence between two Gaussians, we know it has a fixed form, closed form. And basically what all this fizzles down to at training time is that given xt, I want to denoise it. I want to basically train a denoiser. Given a noisy image, I want to predict the ideal one that helped make it. All right, and after we train this model, we go to sampling. So in order to do sampling, we start from random Gaussian noise image. Or just iteratively do, what we iteratively do is that we predict the pristine image. This is what the neural network does. And we add some noise, we add some perturbation to get the next step, and so on and so forth. We do this for a lot of steps in what we call a gradual denoising process, because we started from a very noisy image. And little by little, we remove more and more noise until we converge to an ideal sample. All right. So these were diffusion models in a very quick way. And now we want to use them for image restoration in order to solve linear inverse problems. Okay, so again, these are our diffusion models. We have a assumed distribution generative model. And what we're interested in doing this time is we want to solve an inverse problem. So as opposed to generation where we just want to generate an image out of nothing, this time we have an observation. We have an observation y that we want to condition over it. So what we did is that we defined a different model. We can define a new Q distribution, a new P distribution that are all just the same as diffusion model, only everything is now conditioned on this observation. This observation is given to us, so we can always use it. And once we define these distributions, we can use them in order to do the same thing. But the problem is that these are conditioned over the input, which inherently, of course, depends on the inverse problem being solved. Whether it's super resolution or deep learning, our definition depends on that. But what we are actually interested in doing is we want to use the same diffusion model, the same model, in order to solve all problems, solve any linear inverse problem. So that's basically what we ended up doing. We want to take a generative diffusion model and utilize it to solve any inverse problem, no matter what the definition of y is or h. Okay. So before I get into how do we actually do that for any problem, I'm going to start with a simpler case. So if you remember, we have our y equals hx plus z. I'm going to start by assuming that h is just the identity matrix, so it doesn't exist, and my problem is simply denoising. Y is a noisy version of x. I want to denoise it. I want to get a sample from the posterior distribution of images given this noisy one. So what we did before that, for generative modeling, in order to generate an image, just started from random noise and continued the diffusion process and generate. This time, I already have a noisy image that is not as noisy as this one. So instead of starting from this part, we're going to start at the time step, at the noise level that matches our observation y, and continue the algorithm from there, where each step still depends on y. So if we zoom in a little bit on this step, the diffusion step, how do we actually do it in sampling? So what we did before that in generative diffusion models, we had the previous step xt. We passed it through a diffusion model, got some sort of prediction, and then we just linearly combined them in order to get the next step, maybe with some random noise perturbation. And that's how we got the next step. This time, in order to do denoising, want to condition this whole process on our observation y. So just throw y into the mix and get the next step. Of course, this is an abstraction behind this green box, behind some. It's still a linear combination, but the actual calibration of the coefficients of each one of the elements needs we need to do it carefully. But for now, that's what we do. Okay. So that was the case of image denoising. What if we have?
What if your noise is not Gaussian? It still works.
Oh, so we were talking about Gaussian noise, where we know it's the noise level, know the variance. So there are a few papers on non-Gaussian noise. There's one from Tel Aviv University on gamma noise, and there's one from Technion on Poisson noise. But
it's never really Gaussian noise. We just assume it is.
Right.
The math is impossible if it's not.
Yes.
Right.
If it was, you want all your moments to converge, and in Gauss you get it easily. Otherwise.
Right. So that's why we always assume Gaussian noise, at least in this setting. Alright, so let's consider a slightly more challenging case. Let's say this is my observation. Right. So yeah, I have noise in my pixels that I can observe, but some of the pixels are missing. So in this case, H is the diagonal matrix with some zeros and some ones in them. So there's one wherever I can see the pixel and zero where I can't. In this case, some of my pixels are noisy and available, and some of my pixels are just missing. So what we're going to do we're going to split our algorithm into two parts. So there's the part where I know something about the image, right? I know the pixel, maybe noisy, but I still know something. And there's the part where I know nothing. In the part where I know nothing about the image, the best I can do is just generate it, right? So I can still start from random Gaussian noise, go ahead and in paint, right? Paint in the missing parts in a similar fashion to what a generation usually does. And in the upper part, in the part where I do know the pixels, I want to apply the same denoising algorithm I've seen before. But because I have to keep the steps aligned, I can't do a different process in each part of the image. That wouldn't be good. I have to start from random noise as well in the upper part, in the available part. So we start from random noise. We slowly go towards y. And once we get to a level where we're at the noise level of y, we can apply the denoising algorithm, which tries to reduce the noise that was in y. So just to sum up, we have three cases here. There's the case where I don't know the pixel. There's the case where I do know it, but the current step is noisier than y, so my best option is just to go to y. And then there's the option where I'm behind, I'm already in the final steps, I'm after the noise level of y, and I want to denoise it. So in that part, if we look at the step, it's the same step we've seen before for denoising. I have y, I have my xt, I have my random noise, I linearly combine them. The thing is, y here has a missing part. So because of the missing part, I'm not really going to look at it, right? I'm only going to consider the pixels that are known to me. So we're going to hide that part. And we're going to take it from the other end, from the other case. The case where I don't know anything about the pixels, of course. And then we're just going to do a regular diffusion process without any input from y. And one might ask, so if these two processes are completely different, how do we make sure that the pixels make sense? How do we make sure that these are not just two completely different images? So luckily, our diffusion model handles that. In each step, we apply a diffusion model, which we can see that in both cases, the diffusion model sees the full picture. It can model the dependencies between different pixels, and in both cases, both here and here, we get a dependency between pixels, so it's still a coherent image. And of course, in this part, we only take the bottom part that is relevant to us, because the upper one we took from the previous case. Okay, so that was the case for in painting and the denoising simultaneously. Let's go to the actual case we're interested in. What if H is just any matrix, any linear operator? So in that case, we're going to remember what we learned in year 1 in linear algebra. We're going to do a singular value decomposition of H.
Michiel Ad's favorite.
Of course. Yeah. So, I mean, we do learn this in Michiel Ad's course, so we did have to use it. So singular value decomposition, just as a refreshment, any linear matrix in the world can be decomposed in this way, where both U and V are square, orthogonal, or orthonormal matrices, and sigma is a diagonal matrix, maybe with some empty columns. Sigma has the singular values of our matrix, and U and V are called our singular vectors, their columns and rows. So that's U sigma V transpose. And what's nice is that any matrix in the world can be represented this way. And any matrix in the world, if we consider it in its spectral space, in basically its SVD decomposed space, it's diagonal. What do I mean? Is that if we take a look at the space that is transformed by U and V, the relationship between the input of H and the output of H is diagonal.
Not only diagonal, all your entries are non-negative.
Right. The entries in sigma are non-negative, right? And it's a diagonal relationship. So each point in the input only affects each point in the output, and vice versa.
You can consider it as a kind of a rotation, one in the column space and one in the row space.
Right. So that's U and V, and then there's scaling with the singular values sigma. Exactly. So what we're gonna do is that we're going to take our images X, which H operates on them, and transform them by V transpose. We're going to take our observation Y, which is the output of this H, and transform it by U. And that way the relationship between our observation and our image returns to be diagonal. And in that case, we can still run our denoising and painting algorithm, but only in the spectral space of this matrix. And the nice thing that we prove in this paper, I'm not going to go over the proof, of course, but what we prove is that for any problem, for any H, under some conditions, the optimal solution for training a diffusion model for this specific problem is the same as the optimal solution for training a generative diffusion model. So this theorem allows us to use these pre-trained generative models to solve our inverse problems for any given H. So in that sense, we don't have to train anything for our task, for our inverse problem. We can just take a pre-trained diffusion model. We didn't train anything in this paper, and apply it just with this new sampling process for solving an inverse problem. Any questions so far? Okay. So just to give you an idea of the math, so as I said, we're going to take our X, whether it's XT or regular X, and transform it by V transpose, giving us what we call XT bar, the transformed version of XT. We're going to take our observation Y, transform it by U transpose. And by the way, V and U are both orthonormal matrices, so they don't affect the statistics of the problem. Anything that we can say about the probabilities about XT, we can say about the probabilities of XT bar, and vice versa.
The H is known?
The H is known, but only at sampling time. So you don't want to train a separate model for each H, but at sampling time you do know the H. So you do know if it's super resolution or deep learning or not. Yeah. And we're going to also scale Y by the singular values that we have. And then this very complicated thing goes on, but this is basically our Q distribution that we want to define. I'm not going to go over everything. Of course, we don't really have to delve into all the different symbols here, but important things to notice. We have these three cases. These are the same three cases we discussed in the denoising and in painting segment, where there's a case where the singular value is 0, so that's the same as us not having any information about the pixel. And there are two cases where is the current noise larger than or smaller than the noise in the observation, this time scaled by the singular value because we're considering a general setting. And then what we have inside is just a Gaussian distribution that has all these elements we saw in the linear combination. We have our x0, we have our y, and we have the output of the diffusion model, which will come later once we define the learned version of this distribution. So this is the assumed version.
And it's continuous.
What's continuous?
Continuous in the.
Yeah. So the learned version is just we're going to replace our x0s with the output of the diffusion model, and we're going to want to learn the KL divergence between both this learned version and the assumed version, which this theory under these conditions is basically the simplified version. Our theorem proves that under some conditions, the optimal solution for this KL divergence is the same as the optimal solution for the KL divergence in the generative model. Yeah.
If SI okay, I understand.
So SI is a singular value.
Yeah,
it's going to be non-negative, right?
SI is singular value or sigma?
So SI is our singular value. Sigma is sigma t is the current noise level.
Okay.
Right, and we do have some hyperparameters here, eta and eta b, which of course their choice affects the performance of our model. But the nice thing about DDRM is that we found that we just picked one set of values for the hyperparameters, and they work well across every inverse problem that we tested for. So one more thing, Mike mentioned that diffusion models are insanely slow. Like 4,000 steps is just a lot. So we relied on previous work that accelerated these generative models by skipping some steps, right? And we also skipped some steps, and our formulation allows that. Our formulation also knows how to converge in a very few number of steps. And one more thing, those of you who are more familiar with the singular value decomposition know that it takes a lot of memory. In order to do singular value decomposition for a general matrix, it takes the order of n squared in terms of memory. What we did is that for the more interesting inverse problem, we wrote some algorithms that can do simulate the singular value decomposition in a much less memory consumption. You can do it in an order of n.
What was the intuition behind it?
So the intuition is different for each problem. So let's say for denoising, it's the simplest thing. H is the identity matrix. There's nothing to do, right? The identity matrix, its decomposition is still the identity matrix. For super resolution or deblurring, you can consider it as a convolution, and all convolutions can either be, if it's a separable convolution, you can do the SVD of each dimension, so that reduces your memory consumption. Even if it's not, you can do a Fourier transform, where the Fourier transform you can use the fast Fourier transform algorithm, and that way you don't really have to store the matrices. For colorizing,
you do it in n log n.
Right, n log n time, but
memory. Okay.
This is for the memory consumption. So the problem is that the matrices here are order of n squared, so you don't really want to store them. You want to simulate their operation on a vector. So that way we had a better, more memory efficient algorithm. So basically what I'm showing you in these slides is that we mitigated the drawbacks of diffusion models. We don't have very high compute or memory requirements. So just to sum up what our approach does, we use a pre-trained diffusion model in order to solve any image restoration task, any linear inverse problem. We ended up having a better speed, and as we will see in a few moments, better performance over previous unsupervised approaches. What I mean by unsupervised is that approaches that don't learn for a specific inverse problem, but are general to many different applications. We don't need manual tuning of hyperparameters, just have a single set of hyperparameters that works well for any inverse problem with any image, and also with any data set. And our algorithm can work with both noisy and noiseless observations. So we do allow for Gaussian noise on the measurements, which many previous plug-and-play methods did not account for. You can see here different examples of restorations from DDRM. For example, this is a 4 times super resolution task with some Gaussian noise, an in-painting task, different painting tasks. So either it's random missing pixels, or you want to fill in behind the text in some sort of meme. And there's also deblurring, which also has noise. You have a blurry image, you want to remove the noise and also remove the blurring. These are all reconstructions from our algorithm DDRM. So let's see some more results. Just to see some comparisons. So this is a 4 times super resolution task with some Gaussian noise. You can see the DDRM reconstruction, and the 20 you see here is actually the number of steps. You do this in only 20 diffusion steps. You don't really have to do 1,000 iterations. And what you can see below is that DGP is one of the leading algorithms that are GAN-based that can solve inverse problems. The problem with DGP is that it really doesn't know how to handle noise. And RED, regularization by denoising, it's the previous plug-and-play method that also fails to give reasonable results under noise. Now, for noiseless degradations, RED and DGP perform better. Better than they do here. But I haven't. Okay. But not that much better. So even in the noiseless case, DDRM still outperforms all previous methods in unsupervised image restoration. So our measures of success are PSNR, which measures the fidelity to the original image, which DRM also does better than the rest, and KID, which is similar to FID for those of you that know it. It measures the distribution of outputs. So what this means is that we don't only want to have a great discrepancy, great fidelity to the original image, we also want our images to look realistic. So this is some sort of measure over how realistic the results are. You can see that even though red in the noiseless case has a good PSNR, the images that we get from there don't really look realistic. And on top of all of that, we also record the number of neural function evaluations, so the number of applications of a neural network in these algorithms. You can see that DRM is at least 5 times faster than any previous algorithm that does this image restoration task in a plug-and-play sense. And for when the measurements are noisy, the delta between our results and previous ones becomes much higher.
Sorry, is it the kernel inception distance?
Yeah, kernel inception distance. Okay, so now we're going to get to the good part of the presentation where we have some more pictures. So what's nice is that we took a diffusion model trained for the ImageNet dataset, and we can actually restore images that are out of distribution for this dataset. So because ImageNet is general enough, let's say, we can still take images from outside this dataset. These are standard evaluation images in normal image processing settings. And here we have deep learning with noise, and DRM gives reasonable reconstructions. Same goes for super resolution with noise. And this is a nice figure that shows for denoising, when the noise is heavy, we can see the reconstruction of DRM and the reconstruction of a traditional denoiser. It just takes the noisy image and gives us an output clean one. So both do a very good job of removing noise, right? That's the aim of both. But the thing is, a traditional denoiser aims to minimize the mean squared error, like any deep learning neural network. So when we do that, we have a regression to the mean problem. What I mean by that is that, sure, that image has no noise, looks okay, but if you look at the finer details, look at the hair area, maybe the eyebrows, the finer details of the face, you can see that DRM reconstruction has a much higher level of detail. So if you measure PSNR for denoising, the denoised result is actually better. It has a better overall average fidelity to the original images. But if you look at how realistic the images are, DRM is much more realistic. And why is that? It's because DRM samples from the posterior distribution of images given these noisy ones, whereas a traditional machine learning based denoiser aims to minimize some sort of distance. It doesn't care about the quality of the images produced, just tries to minimize some objective. So it might not be a realistic image, but it still gives us a better score. These are more in-painting results that we saw part of. We have the original images, missing pixels in different ways, and DRM's reconstructions. This is another interesting problem, colorization. We have a grayscale image and we want to restore the color version. So what I want you to notice here is that, sure, this was the original image and this is the grayscale version. But let's look at the teapot. If you only look at the grayscale version, you can't exactly tell what the original color of the teapot was. Maybe you can tell some stuff about it, but you can't really pinpoint the exact original color. And this is a problem even without any noise, right? It's just a grayscale image. So if we just look at the grayscale image, see that there are multiple possible reconstructions. Because DRM relies on a diffusion process, a stochastic process based on random noise, every time we apply it, we can sample from this posterior distribution, and sampling is inherently stochastic. So we can get multiple different results. You see all these different colors of the teapots, of the bear, of the grass, and all of them are realistic, right? So given a measurement, given some sort of grayscale image or low resolution image, there is not just one ground truth great image that we can go back to. Sure, this image was produced by a single image that we saw in our dataset, but if we don't consider that, if we try to put ourselves in the restoration algorithm's shoes, to say, we only see this grayscale image, and all of these images should be possible. So DDRM can also give us a distribution, a posterior distribution, if we apply it multiple times. So up until now, I talked about linear inverse problems, but not everything in the world is linear. If there was some sort of image that somebody sent to me over WhatsApp, and then I forwarded it to someone over Facebook Messenger, and they published it on Instagram, we publish it through all these different social networks. Each sharing platform actually doesn't really send the image as is. It applies some sort of compression, and it's usually JPEG. So JPEG, as you might already know, is a lossy compression format, where we don't actually cover all the details of the image from the compressed version. So when you compress via JPEG very severely, you get these artifacts. So if you look at the bird image, you can see these reaming artifacts and the pixelation artifacts that JPEG incurs. Now, the way JPEG compression works is nonlinear, but still, in a paper in Murek's workshop, we also, with the same authors, me, Miki, and Stefano, and Jiaming from Stanford, we adapted DDRM to also work on JPEG. For that algorithm, we don't have proofs, but it works. So, like any machine learning, like any good machine learning paper, it just works. We can see its results on different quality factors for JPEG. Even for images that look as bad as this log image, we can still restore a reasonable version without any additional information. And the performance is actually similar to algorithms that train specifically for JPEG, whereas here we just take a pre-trained diffusion model and use it to solve the JPEG problem. And that's one thing I really like about diffusion models, that you can adapt them to all these different applications without a specific training for an application, and they perform well. It's because of all these mathematical formulations that you can play with. It's not like any previous generative model, where you just take the generative model as is. It's a black box that can just generate images, and there's not much else you can do with them. For diffusion models, they're much more versatile.
What did you change here, for example?
So one thing here is that since JPEG is not a linear operation, you don't really have a matrix H. So we can't really talk about even spectral SVD, can't really talk about these things. So what we changed is that we considered like H to be the JPEG decoding, and its inverse to be the JPEG, encoding, and its inverse to be the decoding. And what we did here is some sort of projection to the JPEG space. It's basically if you take the noiseless case for DDRM, it's very similar, but we had to do some assumptions. Because in the linear setting, everything was well-defined, well-behaved, and we could actually prove some stuff. We didn't really change much. It's more or less the same algorithm, but it's not exact. The distributions are not exactly valid distributions because we go through this JPEG step.
So can you consider like basically the spectral equivalence you might consider as this kind of a general Fourier transform?
Yeah, it's a general.
It's general. Right. Can you find something equivalent to the JPEG, or doesn't make any sense?
So because JPEG is not linear,
it's not a Unitarian. I think it's not a isometric, so it might be a little bit problematic. But maybe you could find something.
Maybe. We didn't try to generalize.
The linearity is not what stops you.
I mean, the thing about linearity is that it plays well with Gaussian noise. So if you apply linear operator over Gaussian noise, it remains Gaussian. If you apply JPEG quantization or any other nonlinear operation, you lose the Gaussian and you lose the mathematical elegance.
Yeah.
So it's harder to consider. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the algorithm? Because you mentioned that the algorithm, you don't need to train
Right.
the model for each inversion problem,
Mhm.
and then you plug in some math, but you didn't talk about
Oh,
the
so
algorithm.
the algorithm, we talked about the one with the denoising and inpainting, right? So when your problem is inpainting, you
No. The next one. The
general case.
The general case.
Yeah,
Because
okay,
When,
so-
when you showed the math, it was kind of implicit that you're training your model
Oh.
for a v times x for
Yeah,
an x
okay, I
bar,
see.
which is then dependent on your problem.
Right.
So I wonder.
Okay,
where-
so-
where's the trick?
So thanks for the question. Let's just look at this algorithm again in this simple case. So in this simple case, the diffusion model still accepts an image and all is well, right? In the inpainting case. Once we go to the more general case, with any general metrics, we use the singular value decomposition, and we're going to consider x bar and y bar, where x bar is just v transpose x, and y bar is u transpose y, scaled by the singular values, okay? So once we consider these, all the relationships between them still hold in this way. It's a diagonal relationship. Some of the
Yeah,
So-
but now you have a distribution. You don't have a prior of images. You have a prior
Right,
of
right. So-
of bar images.
so the
which
only
are
problem
not
here-
actual images.
So let's say my diffusion model worked on v transpose x. Okay, in that case, all is well, right? But it doesn't. Of course, it doesn't. Now v, what is v? It's an orthonormal matrix that I know. So just here, 1 second before I put my v transpose x into the diffusion model,
Okay.
just multiply it by v back into the image space. I get an output from the diffusion model, and then I multiply it by v transpose. Because these are orthonormal matrices, transformation is easy, and it doesn't even change the probabilities.
Isometric.
Yeah, it's isometric.
So you plug the V.
Both before and after the diffusion model. You have a v and v transpose.
So in practice, how do you train it? You give it a bunch of tasks.
Oh, we don't. That's the beautiful part.
You
Just take the pre-trained diffusion model.
off the shelf
Yeah.
diffusion model that somebody else did.
Right.
Okay.
So in this specific case of ImageNet, we took the actual model from this diffusion models begins paper. We just took their pre-trained diffusion model, and we didn't have to fine-tune it on anything. Just apply it to any problem, and it works and shows the results that we've seen in the following slides.
So the part that basically does the inpainting is something that you added.
Right. It's the sampling scheme. So the whole paper focuses on the sampling scheme, in the setting where you want to solve an inverse problem and not just generate a new image out of nothing. Right. We'll get the results again. And yeah, so beyond JPEG compression and beyond the linear inverse problems that we've seen so far, just want to talk a little bit about this paper's impact. So what we did here is maybe in essence simple. We took a pre-trained generative model, the diffusion model, and we adapted it to solve inverse problem, linear inverse problems. We got accepted at an Eichler workshop as an oral presentation and got accepted to the URIPS conference. And since then, it has been cited many times, and a lot of follow-up work was based on DDRM. And I'd like to mention a few. So there's this paper that improved diffusion models for inverse problems. They were entirely based on DDRM, and they added some more backpropagation through the diffusion model to further improve the performance. They have some really great results from Yangjin Chang and collaborators. Another similar work from a group in Japan. And there's another paper inspired by DDRM from Tel Aviv University. Some folks in Finland actually took DDRM and applied it to the audio domain. So for diffusion models that can apply audio, they solved audio inverse problems such as audio denoising and even things like removing reverb from a recording. Another very interesting paper that even has denoising diffusion restoration models in the title adapted our algorithm for problems in astronomical physics, which I have no idea about, but it's really interesting to see how DDRM was applied to actual real-world problems from different domains. So this problem in the astronomical
But
images.
in astronomy, you might reconstruct the wrong images, because just like you said earlier, in the recoloring process, you might get different colors.
Right. So the nice thing is, since you can sample different samples from the distribution, what they show here is that you can get a mean, and you can also get a standard deviation, at least an empirical one, which they actually measure. In their
You
paper.
don't use generative methods for real science or medical.
For medical, yeah, maybe not, even though there are some works in that area.
As you said, you can use it as an intuition to what may be
Right.
a correct solution, but you can
Yeah.
never use it as a true solution, because
Yeah.
there's always artifacts.
Let's say it shouldn't make a decision in a hospital right now, but yeah,
Hopefully.
hopefully. And there's also one more problem, one more paper which applied the DDRM, which also has DDRM in the paper title, to blind inverse problem, where you don't exactly know the full extent of H. So maybe you know it's a blurring problem, but you don't know the actual hand movement while taking the image. So yeah, had a couple of nice follow-up papers. These are some more results from DDRM. If you want to take a look at our code and the project webpage are available online through the QR code as well. And thank you very much for listening.
Any questions?
Yeah.
How fast it is in inference time, or in generation time actually in this case?
So at inference time or generation time or solving time, we use 20 steps as opposed to the thousands that we've heard. So you want in terms of seconds. So 20 steps on a traditional GPU, again another crazy GPU, takes around for a single image 5 seconds. So it's not that bad. It's at least 5 times as fast as previous techniques that solve similar tasks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
תודה לבלה ושחר.
תודה לכולם.
תודה ממש.